Hey guys, and welcome back to another episode. Today we're going to take a look at the game based on the 90s box office world record holder, which is currently held by its remake, The Lion King. While the film's amazing visual and audio presentations caught the eyes and ears of millions, the characters and profound storytelling is what sealed this film's place as one of the all-time greats. In an era full of 16-bit Disney classics, today we take a fond and thorough look back at Lion King for the Super Nintendo and Sega Genesis. With all of its ports between home console, Game Boy, and even Sega Game Gear, Lion King sold 4.5 million copies. So it's safe to say that this game definitely played a role in over 4 million childhoods as well. Not to mention the friends and neighbors that were eager to give it a try. This is one of the games we grew up with, and just like the movie, the audio and visuals were outstanding. However, what everybody else can attest to is just how surprisingly and ridiculously difficult some parts of the game were. So much so that it was a frequent criticism of the game. Critics called the difficulty unbalanced and not approachable for beginner players, and as somebody that played this game growing up and reflecting on what it took to take some of these levels, I can tell you that these critiques are accurate. It's one of those titles where easy means hard and hard means childhood trauma. Many players, including myself, never made it past its frequent choking points, such as the swinging hippo tails, obstacle avoiding ostrich rides, and confusing monkey toss mazes in level 2, Can't Wait to Be King, and at least half of those that made it through this fell victim to the dangerous and unforgiving obstacles along with numerous vulture and hyenas in level 3's Elephant Graveyard. While the game absolutely has some challenge in level 4 Stampede and level 5 Simbas Exile, especially with instant kill boulders hot on your heels, the difficulty doesn't even ease up as another surprising challenge comes in the hakuna matata stage that's based around the idea of no more worries, but ironically gives you plenty to worry about. To all that made it this far, you were then treated to a beautiful level with a grown Simba that is ready to take his place back in the circle of life. Your strength and new SWAT attack, plus the true roar, is something you've been reaching for your entire childhood. It even teases you with this in the options, letting you know that there's an entire second half of this adventure that you still haven't experienced. Not that you didn't want to, but just due to the fact that you couldn't. The remaining, let's say 25% of players that could actually get this far, which is probably being generous, were ripped wide open and be prepared by all the enemies, molten drips, pesky bats, and rivers of lava that eat through your lives and continues in a hurry. For the, let's say 10 to 15% of players that actually made it through this, I still think I'm being lofty here, you had a maze on your hands in order to reach Pride Rock, with regenerating enemies. Maybe 5% of players or so that made it to the final showdown with Scar and his level. It's another combination of some difficulty and outright confusion, but we will get to that soon enough. Let's talk about what it takes to get through this childhood gauntlet while taking notice of the difference between the Super Nintendo and Sega Genesis ports. Everybody remembers this clip along with this level.
It starts.
This land has a beautiful tone and style that is sure to stick with you for years. Some basic enemies that teach you the fundamentals. Simba is fast and smooth in both versions. You'll notice that the screen view is slightly different since things are just a little bit smaller in the Genesis, so you can actually see just a bit more. Not a good or a bad thing really, not terribly different either, but just the first thing I noticed. You collect bugs as health items, and the enemies you see are lizards, porcupines, and exploding beetles. For some, simply pouncing will work, and porcupines require you to either roar or roll at them to become vulnerable. Roaring has its own meter in your top left. It replenishes naturally, and both of these meters can be expanded over time. There are a couple of special bugs that grow your health or roar meter, and of course the health meter is significantly more valuable. And on level 1, you need to prove that you're worthy with a moving half jump in order to get it. It's one of those levels that you might have to spend some time on purposely just because you know what's waiting for you as soon as you move on. And I definitely remember just parking Simba right here just to admire the surroundings and listen to its amazing music. The checkpoint is a little illustration of Simba from Rafiki's tree, which is pretty cool. You can roll by pressing down as you run, which works well against some enemies, but can also be used to get out of some danger too, and you use it to access the secret area to give you a 1-up and an extra game over continue. As you may have noticed, in the Super Nintendo version, you'll get to hear Simba say "cool" a whole lot. Where in the Genesis they use some other sound effects, and it's reserved for only some of the special moments. The boss is a single hyena, who becomes a common enemy in only a couple of levels, but basically the idea is to get them to use a couple of attacks so they become winded, and then you can pounce. If you jump on them before they are panting, you immediately take damage from one of their attacks. Weird thing about the Genesis is that they seem to cut this thing's growling and attacking audio out entirely, but you can hear it breathing. It's definitely a weird contrast, and once in a while you do hear something from them, it's just hard to predict. We are then treated to a nice little cutscene.
Everything the light touches is our kingdom.
And then it's time for Can't Wait to Be King. This screen right here is all some people remember. It's burned into their brain, and I've seen a trending meme before that said, everybody acts gangster until they see this screen. That's just how many childhoods got beaten down by this level. It starts out introducing a few of the main stage elements immediately, with a swinging tail and rhinos that bump you up into monkeys that toss Simba around, which is a fun and fresh change to the gameplay and immediately tests your platforming to a much higher degree with water death pits between the heads. If you stand on a giraffe for too long, it will lift its head and roll you into the drink. You get to test this ostrich ride, which starts out fun and simple. Interesting little differences up to this point in the Genesis version. The background transition is more gradual as opposed to immediate, and another obscure difference are the ostrich's feet, having running sounds as well. Another tiny difference is the slight movement from the giraffe heads when Simba lands on them in the Genesis. Another one to point out is an aspect of the music. While of course we know that they're going to sound different, we can hear that the Super Nintendo music is complete with the vocal, while the Genesis one does not. Strangely enough, there's chirping from the birds in the Sega Genesis while not in the Super Nintendo. That's 5 notable differences that quickly in the level. Pretty interesting. The first ostrich section just shows you the basics of ducking and a single jump. And this is where a lot of people probably remember dying, because the double jump is weird. It's so hard to tell you what you're even dying from. There's nothing there. I see the nest. What is it? This branch? What's the difference between that branch and this one? This is where I personally got stuck as a little kid forever, and I just didn't understand why a clean double jump wouldn't get me through this. Super frustrating. It conditions you to avoid nests and these things, but this branch comes out of nowhere. You go right through another one that's identical. It just doesn't make any sense. Why is this jump safer than this jump? Who knows? But that tight jump right there is the only way you're getting through this, and you have another one of these in a second without the help of arrows too. Something to point out is that Lion King handles 1-ups differently than most games, since many of them can only be grabbed once, as in if you die, it won't be there when you get back, but there are just a couple of spots in the entire game where a 1-up is there anytime you come back after death, and this is one of them. At least they noticed, maybe during testing, and they're like, yeah, this is hard, let's go ahead and always have this one here. Instead of tweaking or fixing it at all, they just plant a 1-up and say, good luck, you'll need it to get by those ghost nests. When you do manage to make it through the final ostrich section, you will come up to one of the most notorious early childhood trauma-inducing sections ever. This monkey maze confused the crap out of little kids and young players everywhere. They could literally spend eternity here, and I mean a lot of time. So the deal is you need these monkeys to throw you in a certain way to advance. Roaring at them alters them to throw Simba in a different way once he's thrown into their hands. After the first adjustment, you'll cross into the next section of trees. You have to roar at a certain monkey, then go backwards across these floating and sinking logs. And these 1-ups do not come back, by the way. So then you get bumped up again, you'll get tossed around, coming all the way back, and you might think that this is the last monkey to roar at, but no, you have to change the first monkey that you roared at back to his initial state, and that's how this all comes together in order to watch yourself finally leave this purgatory that trapped so many children. Things don't look up quickly though, as the Elephant Graveyard is another challenging level with numerous hyenas, vultures, instant kill acid spouts, and death pits. Not to mention, figuring the right way out isn't super straightforward with a couple different paths or areas, and spots you can fall having to replay huge sections of the stage again, even from the start. I do think the path is overall pretty cool, where the level starts you out going down to the left, turning right for a large stretch, then going vertical, which, by the way, tell me this doesn't look so weird. The ledge hopping in this game is just so strange, but it controls okay if you just keep tapping the jump button as you press where you need to go. As you make your way back to the left, you'll recognize that you're back at the start of the level, but need to use the top of the elephant skull to reach where you need to go. You have to, of course, be very careful with this jump, otherwise you're back at the start of the level. And there gets to be an overload of vultures, which can be pretty tricky to land on them perfectly, and on normal, these guys seem to take 2 hits, but one of these guys is just overpowered and extra angry, requiring more. Who knows why one of them made the decision to give one of these guys more health. Apparently the game isn't hard enough. In order to finish the level, this is where you need to fight 5 hyenas in a row. It faces you with a maximum of 2 at a time, and you have to be really careful and tricky with your spacing and jumps in order to not take damage. Remember, the theme with these guys is to let them attack twice, then pounce as they're panning. Having 2 on the screen at once though can definitely get dicey and weird to survive, plus dying here sends you back pretty far, having you run through a huge section of the level again with lots of enemies, plus the jump over the start of the level, and you have to make sure you get back to this final standoff with enough health since they're so hard to avoid entirely. Other little thing to mention are there are a couple tarps where you can jump on, but they will actually rip without warning after just a handful of bounces, dropping you to your doom. The fight's mood is totally different between the versions, since the Genesis is all muted except for the breathing. It can definitely take a few tries to get this down, but if you can space it out and even get a little lucky, this is what it takes to get past level 3. Level 4 is based on the iconic Stampede scene, and they did an amazing job capturing the intensity in both versions. They did a great job with that, which is more than I can say about the Game Boy version, but hey, we will talk about that on a different day, and a whole lot more. I think playing through a bunch of series on Game Boy would be super interesting, just to see how bad or good it could be. I've also been thinking I want to sweep through some Disney and other big series of games in general, like for the N64, Super Nintendo, Genesis, and then move on from there. Even the Sega Game Gear. I'd love to know what you guys think about that, or if you have any big personal requests for the series of beating and reviewing. So the Stampede is a cool level that is pretty balanced. It never gets out of hand or ridiculously hard. Just have to pay attention to how fast and where the wildebeest are coming from while jumping over the rocks that blink into screen after a quick 1, 2, 3 count. Overall, it's not much longer than a minute, which makes sense and is a cool little level. We then get our second cutscene.
Kill him.
Simbas Exile is an interesting little stage that isn't too long, but definitely has some dangerous spots. Since they didn't go along with the hyenas chasing you, they just have rocks that fall on you if you're moving too slow and around in general, to keep you rushing. Another part of this sense of urgency is when they unleash one-hit boulders as a thing in this level, which I'm positive that this section right here killed kids because unless you roll through this guy instead of roaring, you're done every single time. And it's very possible to get to this point without rolling, so this without a doubt stumped and killed kids constantly everywhere. It's not a long level, you just have to be really sharp when those boulders are chasing you and keep things moving while swinging and moving between the little platforms with confidence. They did a nice job with the darker color to match the darker tone of everything that is going on at this point in the story.
If you ever come back, we'll kill ya! If you ever come back, we'll kill ya!
Things get brightened back up in the next stage of Hakuna Matata, and if you remember the movie, this would be the last stage as a cub, and this is where you finally become an adult, if you can get through this thing. The spitting frog and spider enemies can damage or move around quickly, but aren't your biggest problem at all, as we'll soon see. The visuals and music are outstanding in both versions, again, as I could happily listen to either, but the overall sound and harmony definitely seems a bit deeper in the Super Nintendo version. Also just love the attention in the background and the scrolling too, it just looks great. It starts out bright, fun, and carefree with some water slides down to the bottom of the level, but the more difficult points are coming. We eventually come to a waterfall that we need to scale using the wooden logs with quickly and tightly positioned jumps, where any miscue or bad timing will result in a splash and a lost life. You seriously have to go so high, and getting to the top is nothing that you can cheese your way through. You simply have to improve your platforming and spatial awareness to such a point, and it's absolutely ruthless and another dead end for many that simply could not get past this total roadblock, where you literally could jump around for a minute or more in a single choppy attempt, but at least the music sounds great in both versions, and everything looks really nice without any slowdown, even though there are so many rotating logs. Definitely want to snag the 1-up, anything to help you get further in this quest. Your next challenge comes straight out of left field with a gorilla fight. Yes, a gorilla in Lion King. They really took some creative liberties with these challenges here, I would say. The fight can be tough and take some adjusting, but it's as simple as just avoiding his little coconuts or whatever he's throwing your way. Well, you can't get too close, otherwise he will immediately smack you, and his range is super long, so you have to wait until he pounds the ground, and then that's when you make your move. 1 pounce makes him move locations, and you need to keep following him through 6 spots. 1 is even used purposely to fool you. He sits in a place for just long enough for you to think, how in the world would I get up there? And then he jumps down causing more damage if you're standing in the wrong place. 1 spot is actually a little bit more tricky in the Genesis of where this dang ledge lines up. It's definitely just a little bit better spaced out here in the Super Nintendo version. And after you deliver that last blow, the gorilla finally pounds the ground one last time to his doom. For some reason, they don't have any of the jumping around sound effects in the Genesis, and they also got rid of his splash at the end. Pretty weird. The next level is our first as an adult, Simba's Destiny, and fortunately this was mostly treated as a learning level now that you're an adult. Your new SWAT attack is strong with big range and makes quick work of those leopards that they put all over the place. It's fortunate that you can just stand your ground and pound them into oblivion without many problems. It's super satisfying to jump smack these annoying little rock throwing monkeys, and the only real danger you have, since it's the first level in forever to not have death pits, are these boulders that you have to claw loose and then you have to use them to reach where you need to go. Important to mention that we do have some enhanced pounce abilities that we will get into a little bit later when we have to use them. The music and visuals are really great again, and they capture the mood of Simba finding himself well enough. It's unlikely that any journeys got stuck here. You really just have to be a little careful around the boulders, use your SWAT attack on a bunch of monkeys and leopards. It's really not that hard. Eventually we reach the end of the stage where Mufasa tells us to take our place in the circle of life. It sounds good on both, but it does sound a bit deeper and accurate on the Super Nintendo, I'd say.
You must take your place in the circle of life. You must take your place in the circle of life.
Now is as good of a time as any to discuss bonus rounds, which seems random, but that's how it is for you too. They just pop up once in a while. It seems to happen once with Timon and Pumbaa in any playthrough if you get far enough. These can be over quickly with just one dropped bug by Pumbaa, or if you touch a spider with Timon. But these can absolutely be clutch for extra lives if you collect enough, and even extra continues from the game over screen. Another couple of interesting little differences are the musics for all the bonus rounds. For some reason, Pumbaa and the Genesis and Timon in the Super Nintendo have the same kind of dire theme, a more suspenseful tone overall. They use a more upbeat and fun song for Pumbaa in the Super Nintendo, where they recycled a stage for Timon in the Genesis instead. Alright, final stretch. So as mentioned earlier, there's no messing around with Be Prepared, as the level is not short with plenty of stuff that can either wear you down or kill you immediately. You have to time your jumps over geysers and under drops while taking out enemies, and it's something you have to definitely be precise and skilled for in order to get by, which makes sense at this point since we're towards the end of the game. You have to be much more careful with the hyenas, which aren't nearly as dangerous to you as an adult, which makes sense, but still, they do put out big hurt boxes and give you damage even while you're swatting the shit out of their face. Spatial awareness and tight maneuvers is how you get through this next section. That starts with swatting at a piece of the ceiling in order to drop down below, but this is one of those things that just did a horrible job by making the area for you to die so large. It just doesn't make sense. Look at where I am in relation to this spike, and the fact that I die immediately from this, that's just total garbage, and it should have been fixed, because this is not a real way to lose a life. The game is hard enough without this. We have a couple stretches of floating over lava where our control is further tested, and you can't mess around at all in this point. You need to be swift and precise to take out bats without making any clumsy mistakes and going in the lava, and for some funny reason the Genesis used the water splash. Gosh, that's brutal. This is another one of those special 1-ups that doesn't disappear after death, because they knew this section would kick so many people's ass. Getting to this point isn't a given either, and the jump itself to get to it next to the bat, they definitely don't hand it over to you, but at least it's there to help if you can get it. It's fortunate to have a checkpoint right here with that 1-up, because it's not an easy section with things that can easily go wrong. You even have to run away from another one-hit boulder and jump down to a platform that you can't see while standing up there. So there's a lot against you at this point. But the great thing is they do give you another checkpoint once you're finally through all of this section. Thank goodness. And this is one of the more weird parts of the game. You have to just wait in this room for rocks to fall, outlasting damage, as you wait for platforms to cover the geysers, which takes a while, and definitely just confuses people on what to do next. And if you jump around at the wrong time while platforms fall, yeah, it's pretty damn cheap. Fortunately, as you just figure out the pattern of the rocks, you'll know where to move to, and it'll be over eventually. And then you just get on this last platform where you get blown away to continue your quest to Pride Rock. Alright, so what's one of the worst stage designs you could be possibly given this late into a game with no saves and true game overs? How about a freaking maze? I mean, at least it's kind of creative since you're sneaking into enemy territory, but man, in a game that does not have enemies reappearing once you defeat them at any point, all those bets are off because hyenas will be in a room no matter how many times you've entered it and defeated them, which is a double-edged sword because it's not just the inevitable accumulating damage that you'll take, but it also makes it very hard to know where the heck you've been since everything looks the same and there will always be enemies waiting in there for you. You might think, well, just avoid the enemies and go cave to cave to help keep track of where you're going, but that's not even an option. You need to defeat these hyenas before you can ever leave, respawn or not, every single time. I mean, that really sums up why this level can be so brutal. You just have to know where to go, otherwise we'll absolutely die several times figuring the path out. The size of this maze, fortunately, isn't immensely big, although I'm sure as a little kid who was the target of the demographic for this game would have a much harder time than I did figuring this out, and at least there aren't death pits, but those hyenas are no joke. So this is where you need to definitely get very precise with your spacing as you attack these guys, and you need to use the pouncing technique that I mentioned earlier, which is actually talked about nowhere in the instruction manual. You have to land on them, do not hit the attack while you're in the air, otherwise it won't work, but once you're on top of them, you mash the attack button immediately to maul them, and if you press fast enough, you won't get knocked off, and that's the smoothest way to get through these guys, along with trying to line up multiple at once to be hit by the same attack. The stage ends with you against a whole room of hyenas, so if you get here with low health, it's definitely not likely that you'll make it through this, and you'll be going all the way back to the beginning of the stage, and this entire thing has no checkpoints. Ruthless. At last, here we are at the final level where we get to square off against Scar, and let me tell you right now, this stage can just be downright confusing. It's weird to explain, but sometimes if you aren't attacking Scar in the right way, it will just never end. You could smack him for an eternity, but if you're in the wrong place and just keep hitting him, it never stops. To drive home this point, to show you I'm not exaggerating, I'll just leave this clip of me swatting him in the corner while we talk about the rest of this thing. The fastest way to proceed is to carefully position yourself to pounce and maul Scar a couple times, and when he retreats, you have some platforming to make it through before you can make it to the second section. Now would be a good time to point out once again how great the visuals and audio are, as this truly looks and feels like a last level. They did a nice job with the fire effects on the bottom of the screen, and the background looks great too. The parts in between the fights aren't really much harder than anything you've had to do before this, with more hyenas and platforming. But one point that's really annoying is if you don't move fast enough, and I mean only a couple of seconds, you have all these areas covered in fire around you, and if this happens, you're kind of screwed honestly. You have to just accept the damage and hope that the fire goes out at some point when you try to move through it, because it never goes out no matter how long you wait for it here. But getting to Scar with low health is always dangerous because he's so confusing as an enemy. If you don't have a concrete game plan with perfect spacing, he will always get a swat in on you when you go for pounces, or if you press X to use your throw, he will immediately beat the shit out of you, but mashing helps get you out of this, avoiding too much damage. Getting to the last section is exciting, and all you want to do is finish the damn game and put a cap on your childhood dreams, but unless you figure out the mystery of this fight, it will just never end. You have to get in perfect pounces that aren't too close, and if you work him over enough, you'll notice that he'll be panting, and that's when you go for your throw off the cliff. It's just like in the movie. Once you finally get him where you need him, and if it happens, you realize that it's finally been done and you've beaten the Lion King. So yeah, that's Lion King on the Super Nintendo and the Sega Genesis. It's no walk in the park, as you might think for a kid's game. It's extremely difficult, but the audio and visual is fantastic, and honestly, once you practice enough, it is a fun game to pop in and play once in a while, because it keeps you so engaged, and everything that you're seeing and listening to is nice. Overall, it's been a lot of fun coming back to play this. I honestly do want to expand over to other Disney games, superhero games, big series like that, maybe based on movies, because a lot of those games suffer from the same thing. They're all like brutally difficult with true game overs, you know? So they definitely discouraged a ton of people and got some bad reviews. I think it would be a lot of fun, and of course some frustration to go back as an experienced player and go against some of these games that I just couldn't get anywhere as a kid, but I do think it would bring some closure for sure. Remember to support the show if you've watched this far, and I hope to see you for the next episode. Thanks again and have a great rest of your day.